All right. So here we are, Node.js tooling group meeting this Friday, March 6th, 2020. Hi everybody. And there was a late add to the agenda, which is FS hooks, which I haven't had a chance to look at, but it's the first thing in the list, and Brian added it. So I'm going to ask Brian to talk about it. Please, Brian.
Sure. I guess the list is alphabetical or something. That's how we get with FS hooks first, or
Are you unprepared? I can
no, no,
come
no.
back to you.
I'm fine. I'm just teasing.
All right.
So yeah, basically in our last meeting we discussed the notion of well, just one of the things brought up was the idea of FS hooks, the idea of being able to not necessarily swap out the entire FS implementation, but at least be able to make decisions based on sort of user input. So, sort of what I mean by that is a shim layer for FS that's built in as opposed to the sort of manual shims that we see in existing tools. Basically, just to enable those tools rather than work against them. So that's kind of the long and short of it. So let me see. Let me go ahead and open up the issue here. See what I actually said in it. Right. So like sort of the more obvious examples we have today of things that might find this sort of thing useful would be things like Yarn 2 or Yarn PNP or Tink. So basically anything that's um, presenting tarballs or various other structures as if they were real files for both require and for regular FS access. Uh, on-the-fly transpiling seems like a pretty appropriate use case. Policy enforcement tools might take advantage of this sort of thing. APMs, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't, talk about the fact that this would be advantageous for my employer. And then, of course, things like IPFS that are this sort of notion is actually pretty well geared towards as well. So those are kind of the use cases that I think would motivate this sort of work. And then I guess the only other things I said in the issue is that today people are just basically shimming FS directly and manually, which is prone to all kinds of mistakes and code that's not the best to read. So yeah, that's sort of the motivating things behind this. What do folks think?
Well, this is something. Did Corey, were you bringing this up? I felt like you were. Like NYC could use this or something.
No, I don't think I brought this up.
Okay.
If I remember right, I brought it up.
Okay.
I will say though, I can definitely see the value of something like this. As far as, for example, Yarn and Tink, I haven't really had a chance to fully investigate, but I believe it's Wes made a proposal for import map support, like native to Node.js. So I do think it would be nice if Node.js had the ability to basically look at a data file that would say, this module isn't in Node modules, it's over here in this tarball. But that's kind of a just sidebar.
Yeah, no, I think the proposal goes above and beyond the import map thing, right? Kind of goes next level. I think it would actually cater for Wes. Well, you can extend on that, Wes, but I think it would cater for your use case.
I think I was going to ask how you saw those tied together, and Ruri, I think you were kind of answering that. So.
Yep, and actually, just to say about that, I'm not. Maybe what Wes is proposing could be implemented using this on the back end. I guess my point is that I'd like Node.js to support, for example, reading a JSON file out of Node modules and using that to look up kind of a shared cache of modules rather than, having 100 copies of ESLint, installed to my NPM clones. And I guess the point for me is that Node.js would do that without the user having to, load a runtime hook.
What's kind of interesting to me. So to your point, Brian, I guess like we've been talking about for like months, well, probably over a year now, about how we would facilitate hooking require, because ESM modules, they don't have the same hooks that you have for CommonJS for requiring. So I mean, with this idea, we're basically saying that, are we basically saying that these hooks would be fired when disk access happens, even if it's coming from like your ESM import statement or your require statement? So almost you'd go a layer below where you want the require hook to transpile the file, basically.
So that is pretty much how I was thinking about it, but we might be blocked from doing that for various reasons. Who knows? But that is sort of how I was thinking about it.
Yeah, it feels kind of like you asked your father for something and then they say no, so you go and talk to your mother instead. Like it's kind of what it feels like. But I could see it being useful.
So I think there's some subtle things that this enables beyond what the require hook stuff does. So, for example, when you're doing something like the PKG, bundling, if you access something on the file system relative to like dir, dir name or whatever, now that's obviously no longer valid, right? So this would enable you to do a bunch of stuff for that asset loading, right? Like if you pull in a data file that's not through require and then you are processing that, these type of hooks would enable you to do those type of location rewrites as well. So it is quite a bit more powerful there. So it's not, I see where you're going with it being kind of like, import maps has been seeing some resistance. So let's go and do it this other way. But at the same time, like there's a reason why this might actually be the better way. And then we build everything else on top of it.
And
go ahead, Corey.
I just wanted to comment about the ESM loader hooks. At this point, there is an experimental loaders flag that you can point to a ESM file that supports a transform source hook. And I have actually used that in one project to essentially I use Babel plugin Istanbul to get coverage of ESM files, loaded with native Node.js under NYC. So that is supported right now, or experimentally supported.
Cool.
So I had I don't. Okay, so I want to do the devil's advocate thing. So so these 4 bullet points here. So the first one in the issues tool, why this would be some use cases for this. Tools that build up a fake directory structure and access packed files or files that are located elsewhere. So can somebody explain to me now? I kind of know the answer to this, but somebody explain why tools like Yarn and Tink need to do this.
The $1 million question.
It might not be that they need to do this, but more that they want to do this to enable various use cases by their users, or to make various performance improvements or things like that, while still maintaining a level of, being a transparent tool, right? Not being in the user's way. I'm purely speculative here, though.
So you never have to npm install is essentially the get-go, I think, there. Yeah, you only download the modules that are actually being required, or download the files that actually need to be loaded.
Okay.
From what I understand, the way it works is that instead of unpacking everything into node modules, there's basically a script that I'm not sure where it hooks, but one way or another it hooks the requires to where instead of loading from node modules, it loads from, say, a shared cache of tarballs. So in the case of, let's say you have 100 repositories cloned, I believe the way it works is that you would have a shared cache of tarballs and everything would load from that. And in the case of like where a project ends up where it can't deduplicate everything, you don't end up with a dozen copies of a module installed to node modules.
So to be clear, though, these are two cases that I think are being conflated that don't need to be, right? You can, as I was trying to show in the import maps, do this without file system level stuff, right? It doesn't give you one of the qualities that I think Darcy was referring to, which is file-based stuff. The import map is only module or package based, right? So it would still download and install the entire package, even if you weren't using half the files. Whereas the file system shim, which is what I understand from one conversation with Isaacs, is how you intend to do Tink, gives you specific file, the ability to do that on specific files as opposed to a package entirely. That said, though, I think you could probably do the same thing, maybe not with import maps, but with something like that without necessarily still having to shim the file system, right?
On the ESM side, the loader hooks have the ability to do a resolve hook. I'm not sure if or how you could support that on the CJS side, though, because I think basically there's no way to tell the loader, hey, I actually loaded this file from this other directory. I mean, you can load it from an alternate location, but I'm not sure if that rewrites the dir name and file name variables, for example.
So the example that I did with the import maps, it just overrides resolve module or whatever it is, a resolve file name. I can't remember the name of the method. Anyway, and it does unfortunately change the dir name and all that other stuff. That's just a proof of concept, though. I'm sure we could, find ways to work around that with CommonJS.
Well, I think you would need to change the dir name because like a lot of times, if I need a data file within a package, then I'll use dir name to find that file. So that would need to point to the location where the files actually exist.
Yeah, you're right. So I guess that in that case, it does just work as you would expect.
Okay. Well, I don't want to, I'm not going to go off on a tangent about the relative merits of this sort of thing, but okay, so on the fly translation. So it seems to me that there used to be a thing for this, which is now deprecated, which is like require extensions or something like that, where you could require a .coffee file and it would load the CoffeeScript thing and CoffeeScript running, and so it would just kind of do it behind the scenes.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, okay. So when I wrote that, I actually had a slightly different use case in mind, and that is serving up JavaScript assets, with Express static or something like that, and then having those files being transpiled before they're delivered to the browser, like transparently.
Right.
Which
I mean,
would be actually useful. I was just sort of spitballing use cases here.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it seems like at the end of what you get is some sort of representation in JavaScript, right? Some sort of object or what have you. Maybe it's a byte array. I don't know. But I mean, it seems like kind of the same thing, but I don't know why that was ever like, I know it's deprecated. I know that, but why was it deprecated? And like, what are you supposed to do instead? Does anybody know?
That's, oh, sorry, Corey, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
I was actually going to volunteer you and say that that's what Corey was talking about with the loader hook. So it was just people wanted there was basically contention that that required out extensions was too low level and allowed people to create things. Well, as an example, it was difficult to compose multiple require hooks together, and it was hard to know in the Node.js runtime environment what had actually been done to the files before they got brought in. So there was just a lot of FUD around that functionality, and people were excited to remove it with the perfect new world of ESM modules, which was we could start from scratch and everything would be perfect. There's then been a lot of contention around how you still would support tools like NYC, because like we had NYC, we have Babel require, TypeScript require, you have all Mocha require, like you have all these things that were relying on this hook and were pretty popular things in the community, and there wasn't really an API. And now it sounds like there is an API behind an experimental flag, which is what Corey's talking about. My concern would be with like doing the lower level file access thing. I think you would run into a lot of pushback from the same folks who are really excited to deprecate require. And you know what, I do understand both sides of the argument. Like it was really hard to know what the heck people were doing with that require statement. It required out extensions.
So just to correct one thing you said, the experimental loaders, from what I can tell, that will not help us move away from the require extensions. The experimental loaders is for ESM only. So essentially, I mean, we still have to support CJS, so we're going to continue to be using the require extensions hook. And at this point, I've gotten the impression that it's flagged as deprecated, but there is no alternative. So I don't really see a way that they could get away with removing it at this point.
Okay. So policy enforcement tools may want to prevent access to certain files or change their contents on the fly to obfuscate contents. Yeah. Okay.
I think if you removed to obfuscate contents, I think this would actually be a really good point, right? Which is if you had something and you wanted to ensure that it couldn't, reach certain file directories, you could use something like this to implement a security policy, right?
Subject to a bunch of caveats, of course.
Yeah.
The most obvious one I would think would be that the code that this hook would have to be completely isolated from, user code or that sort of thing.
Right. I mean, it could be handy though. I mean, I don't know.
One really,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say one really interesting use case to me is like if you look at how Dino approaches things, just the idea that you could be requiring, like I guess Chris didn't like that. The idea is that you could be requiring from a URI directly, like you might be reaching out to the web and pulling something in. I don't know, like you said, Brian, like you could conceivably do that by abstracting the file operation to be a web operation, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, you might have some difficulty with that just by virtue of the fact that there are synchronous file APIs. But I mean, if you're blocking and using spawn sync or something to actually solve that, then, there you go. So there would always be kind of a way around that, I suppose.
Yeah. The fourth one, stuff like IPFS. I mean, that seems like, okay, so you mentioned Fuse down there. It's like, well, why can't you just do all this stuff in Fuse? Why do we have to pull it up to Node? You know what I mean?
I mean, I think there's potentially advantages to doing stuff like this in the application layer, but that's potentially entirely debatable as well. So I don't know.
So I mean, what if? Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of, what if something like Tink or Yarn 2 that wanted to do this plug and play stuff, instead of monkeying with Node, they create this phony Fuse based file system underneath them, and who knows what, you know. Okay, and then the fifth one is APMs, which there can care to be more specific about APMs there?
Yeah. So I mean, right now the way most Node APMs work is they're going to basically shim everything they want to trace, right? Everything they want to measure, they're going to shim. Having predefined hooks makes that less necessary. And so, for example, at Datadog, in other languages that do provide hooks for various things, we get to actually latch into those hooks, and it becomes a lot easier to do that job. But that perhaps is a purely selfish use case, because, you know, that's for me and my work. But you know, and the other thing is that you would probably eventually want to do this with various other core APIs as well, not just FS, right? So I don't know.
So I mean, yeah, if we're going to go this route, then I think we need to consider what are all the alternatives for these things. You know, because people are going to be like, no, we don't need to do that. You can do this instead, right? Because that's the way people are. So we need to be sure that, you know, this is really going to be something that we can champion. Also, Jordan commented below that there should be a way to disable this, right? So if you're running code where you don't want some other tool to add some weird hook, you should be able to say so. And I don't know if that starts to go into the policy area where there's all these concerns, and there's like, you can only lock it down so much without other changes, you know what I mean? And so I don't know, but I mean, do you think that's reasonable? The being able to disable this behavior, essentially.
So I sort of see that being useful from a sort of sanity and potentially security perspective, right? Making sure that you're absolutely aware of what the application is doing because you're the one who've actually installed those hooks. On the other hand, I could potentially see some value in having these being stackable, right? Done in layers kind of thing. You know, perhaps one layer is dealing with APM-like stuff, you know, I've inserted it, and perhaps another one is doing something more like Yarn 2 or Tink, right? I don't know. I could see that kind of value as well.
Wouldn't that get really hairy really fast though, right? So say Tink is modifying where it's loading the file from, and then you want to shim. So now your layer needs to first let Tink, I guess it would, like, the ordering is going to matter a lot there, right? And
Yeah.
like, okay.
Yeah, like, I mean, that's no different than any other kind of like plugin transform like APIs that you see in the wild for other like ecosystems, like and
Right.
libraries. Like,
Middlewares.
yeah, but you could potentially bucket them. So we could decide like if there's an access specific transform versus resolving, like resolver transforms or something like that, or workers or whatever you would like want that to look like. And then how you load them or specify the ones that you're loading. I don't know what that API would look like, but my
Seems
head
like we could just follow really closely to what loader hooks do, right?
Well, yeah, that's kind of, yeah.
Have you all heard of aspect-oriented programming? So it's, I can't explain it really well, but what I can say is that it's essentially just like a ton of middleware stuffed in there, and things happen, and it's all kind of abstracted away, and you can't really. It's really hard to know what the hell's going on at any point because there are all these cross-cutting concerns. They like take out all the cross-cutting concerns and put them in this bucket, and they call these the aspects and blah blah blah, and like logging, for example. And so maybe you've got logging all across your code, and there's like a way to stuff it in there, and it's completely like hidden and magical. And if there's a problem with it, it's going to be really hard to debug. And so you start to get in this place where you're adding all these hooks for various things, and you don't really know what the hell's going on, and it's really hard to reason about like what your program is doing. I think that yes, I could see the potential for something like this to be abused, overused, perhaps, maybe not, maliciously, but hey, I can use this FS hooks thing to do something that you could have just done via some other built-in,
I mean, my point of view right now is, about this idea mainly is just like, I'd love to see some things land. Like, I'd love us to actually have a good story about how we're transpiling ESM, and I'd love us to at least get to a terminal point on like import maps or export maps or whatever. I don't know how many maps there are, but it feels like there's a lot of car parts all over the garage right now, and it would be good to clean them up a little bit. That's just my personal opinion right now.
Yeah, in terms of Tink or anything that we like, I'm not pushing hard on this because we require like some sort of like file contents API to actually like properly take advantage of something like this anyways. So right now, like anything that would be built is still going to be kind of experimental. So until, yeah, I'd also like to see work sort of wrap up on, let's say, like the loader hooks or, the other pieces that are in flight right now.
What do you mean by file contents API?
So like if we were to stub out FS and it was for the reason of not having to download the entire tarball, but to actually go out and get specific files, we might be able to essentially get individual files from a package instead of the entire tarball. So like the registry potentially could expose some sort of API for specific file contents within a package, which is a concept that I think we were kind of thinking about with Tink. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
One thing I'd also like to add is the future of some theoretical API like Tink. We do have I think there's a lot to work out there, and whether that will be able to land as people's normal JavaScript workflow. I have my doubts, but I think this particular proposal serves much more than just that use case. That's just the one that I think is on the top of people's minds. So if we think it, as I think it can be used for more than just that, I think we should make sure the conversation is more about the general stuff than just about whether or not we can build Tink on top of it.
Yeah, I apologize. I did not mean to make that specific for that project.
I didn't mean to say you did. I just meant in general, we as a group, if we're like looking at that list of 4 things, maybe that should be number 2 or 3, not number 1, just so we're clear that there's more important use cases this could serve.
So could I just comment on number 3, the policy enforcement? I'm a little concerned, depending on how that was documented. I'd be concerned that we want to make sure that we're clear that it's not really a security feature, since it can be circumvented theoretically I assume it could be circumvented pretty easily. and maybe even recommend that, if you need real security, then you need to look at, to the operating system, whether it's SE Linux or I don't know, other platforms. So whatever the other platforms would provide for process level security. Anyways, just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that whatever API we would provide would necessarily call out all of these specific use cases anyway. So I would hope that anybody implementing such a thing on top of this would take all of that sort of thing in mind and put that in their documentation.
Oh, okay. I think I understand what you're saying. So basically, this would just be, here's hooks that you can hook into FS, and it wouldn't necessarily tell you like these are the things you can do with it. Just this is the API.
Pretty much. That's sort of how I see it right now. I don't know. I mean, perhaps some use cases should be called out, but I certainly agree with you. We would certainly want to not point people in a direction that would cause them to do something that is prone to attack.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Do we want to move on for this one? Is that all right? All right. I don't have anything to say about recursive chmod. Does anybody have anything to say about recursive chmod right now?
I think it's a good idea, and if it's a good place for someone to get involved if they want to contribute to the Node project. So
yeah, that's a good idea.
but I think it would land without that much controversy if it was a good implementation. So.
Okay. I don't think I don't know. I haven't seen any movement on the hot module reloading or module reloading stuff. Has anyone been paying any attention to that? Anybody know anything? No.
Yeah, I do think it dovetails with the earlier conversation though that we need to maybe like, I don't know if we surface to maybe talk to someone on the TSC and be like, listen, like in the tooling meeting, we've noticed there's a lot of things that overlap in terms of how we handle file system access. Like, just worth surfacing. Like it would be good to I don't know, lend your voice maybe.
Sorry, I'm trying to write this down. Many overlapping concerns regarding file systems and
yeah, like how the heck you map one path to another path, how you reload something out of path, how you like basically all this stuff that was being hacked together with required extensions before.
right. Okay. I mean, all like, yeah. Okay. Spawn sync hooks without patching.
That one is kind of on me, but I haven't had any time to work on it. To be honest, at this stage, I think we could remove this from the agenda for now, because it might be it's probably going to be a few weeks before I have a chance to work on that. And actually I'm not sure the same may apply to the next item as well. Better way to hook process exiting.
Mm-hmm.
Although for that one, I'm not sure that I'll necessarily be able to work on that at all. Just an issue of skill level and familiarity with that part of the code.
Do you think, Ben, I thought you may have been looking at this one, the better way to detect a process?
Yeah, I haven't had any cycles, but I am interested. Like, I would love for the stuff that NYC does and the stuff that C8 does to just be something any userland tool can easily write. And that's a combination of detecting exiting, which is important for writing reports at the end of your program, and also being able to pass the same environment variable to each subprocess, which I think Corey figured out some better ways. Well, there's no way to make them sticky, so I'd like that to be a feature too. So maybe leave it on for now. I don't know.
Actually, right now, there is, in user space anyways, there's a way to make it sticky, but to do that without patching Node.js, like, altering the child process object, that's what the hooking spawn and spawn sync would do for us. Because right now I have a user space component that patches spawn and spawn sync, and that actually enables us to do sticky variables and enforce preloads.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's worth leaving this stuff on. Jordan, LJ Harb, who's in the Node tooling Slack, was just asking this week of how to knock something in a sub process. And I was like, man, if we had all this stuff that we use for NYC in very janky ways just available to everyone in userland, then you could do stuff like that. You could be like, I want to, in every sub process, mock the HTTP connection. It's super useful. I think you could have a lot of really interesting little tools like that written if we had a better pattern for doing this. So
yeah, and actually for that I did refer him to the user space module I wrote for that, the node preload. But again, it would be nice if that could be modified so that it didn't modify Node.js internals.
So I'm voting for those things on the agenda. Just I have no cycles, so
Yeah. Okay, so looks like source map support. So Ben put some stuff in here, and one of those things is that a blog post was written. All I see is pardon the interruption, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so yay. So there's a nice article. I haven't actually read your article. Sorry, Ben, but
it's funny, I actually noticed like it got really good pickup, like it was published by the Node blog and it got tweeted it got JS Weekly and everything. But I noticed like my readership compared to the one we wrote on coverage was way down. So I'm kind of tending to agree that maybe it's time to move away from Medium as a blogging platform to like Dev. What was the one you suggested?
Dev.to. It should be trivial to just like import it.
I like Medium, so I feel bad, but I can understand the paywalls maybe driving people away or something. So yeah, but give it a read if you're curious. It was mostly just to get it on people's radar so they actually know that feature exists. But the other agenda item was I've been talking to, is it Simon who works on Jest, I think? Simon, oh, can't log in here. Yeah, so I've been talking to one of the maintainers of Jest, and they in Jest do a bunch of source map juggling, where they like are inserting source maps on the fly and doing a bunch of work with them. And he was asking whether we could extend the API to let you just kind of insert a source map. Right now, the API allows you to get out a source map, so you can see what source maps have been used, but we don't actually let you insert a source map currently. So I was thinking if it could get Jest more excited about using some of these features, I was thinking of maybe we should add the ability to add a source map as well. Would be kind of neat. And kind of the cool thing there is if you like, maybe you're generating code without an import or require statement, like you're, I don't exactly know what you're doing, but you could still potentially put some things in the source map cache and still have a stack trace print out a nice stack trace, which I thought was kind of cool. So I'm trying to figure out more use cases for the source map stuff so that people are more excited about it. I submitted a patch to Mocha and had it turned down. So.
You did?
Yeah, well, I think it was a fair point from one of your maintainers, which was that they don't want to document every possible Node.js flag inside of Mocha because you'll now have documented 200 different flags for Node.js inside of Mocha. So,
oh, follow up with me, because I mean, there's that we should have that covered with allowed Node.js environment options, or whatever the hell it's called.
Yeah. At Google, we've just been starting to, like, in our Mocha config, we've started putting in just enable source map support as one of the Mocha flags. And then because you're smart and pass it along to Node.js, you can actually just update your Mocha config to have source maps, and then it starts working right down in your application. So it gives you like a little bit better, nicer stack traces. And I have been testing it. Works with Express well now too. So that's no longer a problem.
Yay.
I don't know, the feature's getting a lot better. I'm excited about it.
Cool. All right. So last week, Ben and Roy and I met about argument parsing. And so do either of you want to talk about what we talked about?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually, I thought it was a pretty good meeting. Do we have can we share the hack pad we wrote? Do you have a link to it?
I think that, wait. No.
Okay, cool. So
you have it.
But long story short, like the feature, we were actually in agreement on, well, the three of us, obviously we're, so I'm sure everyone will have different opinions as we start to share more widely, but we were pretty much in agreement on a lot of the minimal features. So like, we were like, okay, we managed to basically redline tons of things that are in most argument parsers and still felt we had something relatively useful. There were a couple of interesting points of contention. One of them was like single dash flags. Like if you go dash ABC, some argument parsers take that as A true, B true, C true. And we were talking about whether, like we said, that was like that was kind of the one feature we did not agree on the parsing of in our like hour conversation. I don't know, I was kind of happy. It got me excited. I think that there was a minimal feature set from my point of view as the maintainer of Yargs that I could pretty much throw out Yargs parser and build a little bit on top of this minimal feature set and be able to just use the thing that's kind of the agreed upon baseline. So I felt like we had something close to what I could build on. And again, like with a fraction of the features that are in Yargs parser or Minimist or Commander or any of that stuff. I thought that was neat. And I also felt like what was cool is that it was enough of a foundation that you could then like have much nicer code samples, which is a big thing we do at my job, is writing code samples for a lot of different languages. And it would mean that the code sample just read really elegantly, right? Like it would still look a lot like a nice full-featured argument parser. It was like you get a nice object bag out the other end. So we weren't having a ton of contention. I think maybe once we went to a wider audience, we might get more contention. I don't know. I think it's a neat idea though, because I think what you did then do is like someone could build something like Commander or Yargs on top of it as a baseline and then give you like the pretty command line output, give you all that stuff. I think if we had the rate minimal, I don't know. I'm starting to think it's a good idea.
I wasn't sure. I got the feeling that Roy had like different ideas about what to do with this stuff, that because of time we didn't really get to those. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't remember what it was, but I do remember we wanted to continue, right? And we'll probably do a follow-up, right?
Yeah, you said something about like what you had in mind was even like more trimmed down than this. Was that?
Yeah, I can't remember right now.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
yeah, basically, yeah, I was championing more just very baseline implementation that people can build on top of it.
And to be clear, we're trying to focus on the use case of the author of code samples, not necessarily the the library author who's building something like Yargs and who wants to build on top of it, because those, it serves two different sets of people. And we've seen that people can already build Yargs. So what I think we're lacking is serving the people who just want to parse like a couple command line flags and not have to pull down, a third party package or worry about a bunch of config settings or whatever. So
from my point of view, like I can definitely be convinced to go in that direction if we have another meeting, and like that's really where we slice things down to. I was getting kind of excited that I was like, oh shoot, this actually could work as a foundation as Yargs, because I don't know, it turns out we were agreeing a lot on a lot of the minimal features, which was cool. So yeah. I feel like another hour session and then maybe share it with the whole group would be good.
Yeah.
Maybe then report to PR.
Yeah, I totally agree that, if we can do both, that's cool. But I don't want to, I don't want to make it more complex than necessary just to serve the library author crowd.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
But yeah, I really want to, I do want to follow up and meet again about that. It's fun.
Yeah, it's just, I think I remember a little bit one of the discussions we were having, like with regards to like having ABC shortcut, right? That's something that it can easily be extended or like provided by something else, rather than having to have that baked in to the. Yeah, and then Ben was more in the side of having it, because
that's where I got in the devils is in the details. It was like, okay, cool, we can let people do that in userland, but now we need to distinguish between, has someone provided a double dash or a single dash, and do we track the double dash or do we track the single dash, and is it like you know what I mean? It just starts to, you start to realize why Yargs has 3,000 unit tests, right? It's like people have a lot of opinions about argument parsing.
And it's just really easy to get into the weeds with it, because there's just, well, what if, what if this expects a Boolean flag? What if it's a string? What if I give it 3-Vs? Like, how do we handle these things? And so we need to figure out what's reasonable for most people. And I mean, maybe one of the things we need to do is sit down with somebody who hasn't written a command line tool in Node, and be like, all right, so you need to parse these options. What do you expect to happen here? You know what I mean? So like, does this make sense? Just kind of, whatever you call it.
That seems reasonable. Like kind of a user research.
Usability, yeah.
That could be like, just even considering that, either like that's a great idea, I think, because it would really help the case if we're eventually going to open up a PR on Node and create a giant argument with the community about whether we should do this or not. It might make sense to already have some of that, like, listen, we've talked to some early Node users and we have this feedback and they found this confusing, and here's what we've come up with, just rather than it all being opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Or does anyone, speaking of opinion, does anyone on the call currently violently opposed to this idea? Or I don't know, just definitely curious to hear other people's opinion.
So I'm not sure I have an opinion yet without seeing an implementation. So I guess for me, like, I wonder if we could get a proof of concept in user space. Like, I'm not really sure how anything in the argument parser would not work, would only work if it's in the Node core. So if there was some kind of module where I could basically, require and play with and kind of see how it works, then it might be easier to critique.
We're probably going to want something to be able to shim it anyways for older Node versions. So maybe a starting point. Oh, it's kind of putting the cart in front of the horse to do it as like a node module maybe, but maybe it would make sense to do as a node repo. I don't know.
There are so many argument parsers out there that I feel like we'll probably just land very close to an existing one, whatever it is that we're providing.
I don't know. I think whatever we come up with is going to be a lot simpler than most of the tools out there.
There must be simplistic ones.
I mean, Minimist, right, is pretty simple.
Minimist is shockingly complicated. Minimist is actually the foundation of Yarg's parser, and it's like it does this shocking number of things. He might have torn some of the stuff out, but they have like a common lineage, and it does quite a bit.
It's also relative. It's hard to say. This feels simple to me is maybe what my statement should have been.
That's fair. Yeah.
All right. Well, does anybody have anything they want to bring up in the last 5 minutes? Any questions, any show and tells or anything like that? So what I'm working on right now, I have nothing to show because it's kind of broken, but I'm working on getting Mocha to run tests in parallel. So that's interesting. It once upon a time, long before I came onto the project, it did have this functionality, but it was torn out for reasons, and I don't know what those reasons are. Maybe somebody was using it, 7 or 8 years ago on this call that could tell me, because I don't know, but
it was Mocha TJ Hollowaychuk originally, or who was?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's TJ code. Yeah. So, but Mocha had its own Browserify, like before Browserify was a thing.
So yeah, because it had to, because it ran in the browser, so it needed some sort of bundling mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah, he had his own Mocha bundler. So, yeah. Anyway,
is there anybody on this call who's not currently maintaining a TJ Hollowaychuk project? Because okay, well, so we've got to find some to give to you.
Yeah.
I guarantee you there's at least 2 or 3 that are maintainerless right now with lots of usage.
Well, I might maintain the like GitHub parsing library, but I haven't touched it in like 3 years.
What about Git extensions? Is anybody looking after that one?
Is TJ not actually looking after that one?
I don't know. Anyhow, so what I'm doing with the parallel runs is right now I'm experimenting with workers. And so basically taking a file, so I create a worker pool and then like gather all the files up and then hand out the files to these workers and they go and run it. And then they like send the results back to the main process. And then I kind of aggregate them together. And so, my initial experiments with this is like Mocha's own unit tests. They in serial they took 3 seconds to run, and with 8 cores on my Mac, it's 1.5 seconds. So yay! But workers do have some limitations. You can't do certain things, and I don't know. It may be that the benefits in terms of speed are going to not be worth it, and maybe I just want to do child processes. But yeah.
I remember Isaac was going through this refactor for TAP about a year ago, and because TAP was again like trying to parallelize things. So you might talk to Isaac is my point, I guess, because I think he was even experimenting with workers versus subprocesses because subprocesses made TAP really slow. So he was trying to figure out a way to make that just an optional thing.
Well, I mean, for what I understand, what TAP does is it launches it launches a child process per test file or something like that.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. Yeah.
Why does it do that?
Because then everything can run in parallel. Hey,
Well, if your tests clean up after themselves, why couldn't they? Right.
That's not necessarily a given.
Well, that's the thing, though. I mean,
most
Mocha you only uses one. Mocha has one process. Well, it has two processes, but it has one process where it runs all the tests. So if
Yeah.
you screw those up, well, you screw them all up because there's only one process. So that means this suggests to me, well, if you keep your tests clean, then you should be able to reuse. I don't know. Anyway, I'm just
it's a different mentality.
Yeah.
It behaves totally different. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. So that's what I'm working on, and it's exciting and interesting and not easy at all. So
Nice. We're
Yeah.
big users of it here, so if you need an experimenter, I'll run it on some stuff.
yeah.
Give you
I would
complaints.
What's that,
I
Corey?
would suggest experimenting with NYC. I would say it probably definitely won't work with NYC 14. With NYC 15, your mileage may vary.
I already know debugging doesn't work. So that's been fun. Anyway,
I believe another thing is you can't chdir in a
no, you
worker
can't.
thread.
And that's one of the sticking points. So because for some reason, I don't know, some people need to do it that want this here. So anyway, it's time to go. But thank you, everybody, and see you in 2 weeks. Bye now.
Bye bye.